My disabled coworker needed to be fired, and I was the only one willing to say it out loud. Look, I'm not a monster. Greg had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. That's not why he needed to go. He needed to go because he was terrible at his job, and someone was going to get hurt. We worked at a warehouse distribution center. Greg was hired 6 months ago for inventory management. Sounds perfect, right? Desk job, computer work, staying out of the way of forklifts and heavy machinery. Except Greg decided that wasn't enough for him. First incident was week 2. I'm driving a pallet jack with about 800 pounds of boxed merchandise when Greg rolls right into my path. No warning. I slam the brake and the whole thing nearly tips. He just laughs and says he thought I saw him. Week 5. He's reaching for items on shelves he can't access safely. Instead of using the system we have or asking for help, he's stretching out of his chair, nearly falling. Boxes came down twice. One hit him in the shoulder. The other crashed 3 feet from another worker. Our supervisor, Janet, just kept saying we needed to be patient, that Greg was adjusting, that we needed to be understanding of his limitations while also not treating him differently, which made 0 sense because the whole problem was Greg refusing to accept the limitations of his actual job. Month 4, Greg started operating equipment he wasn't trained on. Found him trying to use the electric pallet jack in the back section. That thing requires certification. He said he watched enough people do it and figured it out. When Janet found out, she just moved him to a different zone instead of writing him up. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. But nobody would say anything because Greg was disabled, and apparently that made him untouchable. The breaking point was 3 weeks ago. We have these rolling carts for small item picking. Super basic. You push them around, load boxes, bring them to packing. Greg decided he wanted to help out because his section was slow. Fine, whatever. Except he's zipping around in his wheelchair, pulling a cart behind him with one hand, and he can't see behind him properly. He backed right into Aisha. She's 62, been here 15 years, about 4 months from retirement. The cart caught her leg and she went down hard. Broke her ankle in 2 places. She was on the ground crying and Greg just kept apologizing over and over. Janet sent him home for the day. Didn't suspend him. Didn't write him up. Just said it was an accident and these things happen in warehouses. I went to Janet's office the next morning. Told her straight up that Greg was a liability and needed to be let go before someone ended up worse than a broken ankle. She got all uncomfortable and started talking about accommodation requirements and discrimination laws. I said I wasn't asking her to fire him for being disabled. I was asking her to fire him for being bad at his job and dangerous. She told me to drop it. Said HR was aware of the situation and managing it appropriately. So I went to HR myself, filled out an incident report, listed every single thing I'd seen over 6 months, dated, detailed, witnesses named, dropped it on their desk and said if they didn't handle this, I was going to OSHA. That got their attention. They scheduled a meeting for today at 2 p.m. Greg, Janet, HR director, and the regional safety manager were all supposed to be there. I wasn't invited, but I knew it was happening because Janet looked like she was going to puke all morning. 12:30 hits, and Greg rolls up to my section. He knows I reported him. Don't know who told him, but he knows. He parks right in front of me and asks if we can talk. I put down my scanner and told him we could talk. He reaches into his bag and pulls out a folder. Hands shaking. Says he's been documenting everything too. Every time someone rolled their eyes at him. Every time I specifically avoided helping him. Times I took the long route to avoid his section. He's got dates, witnesses, even photos. Says his lawyer looked at it already. Then he smiled and said the 2 p.m. meeting isn't about firing him. Janet walks up behind me, her face completely drained of color, and says we need to go to HR right now because corporate's on the phone and they're talking about my employment status. I looked at Greg. He was still smiling, but his hands were shaking harder now, gripping that folder like it was his lifeline. Janet grabbed my arm and I pulled away from her. "What are you talking about?" I said. "Just come with me. Now." Her voice cracked on the last word. Greg wheeled backward to give us space. "See you at 2, buddy," he said quietly. The walk to HR felt like a death march. Janet wouldn't look at me. We passed Darren from shipping, who gave me this weird, sympathetic look. Word travels fast in warehouses. Everyone always knows everything. The HR office was in the front building, past the loading docks and through the double doors that separated the warehouse floor from the administrative side. I'd only been in there twice. Once for onboarding 3 years ago, once for my annual review last month, where they told me I was doing great work and gave me a 75-cent raise. Patricia from HR was waiting in the conference room. So was Dennis, the regional operations manager. I'd met him exactly once when he toured the facility last year. He wore expensive suits, and had that corporate smile that never reached his eyes. "Sit down, please," Patricia said. She had a stack of papers in front of her, and her computer was open to what looked like an email thread. I sat. Janet hovered by the door like she wanted to escape. Dennis cleared his throat. "We've received some concerning allegations about workplace harassment and disability discrimination." My stomach dropped. "From Greg." "From multiple sources, actually." Patricia pulled out a document. "Greg filed a formal complaint this morning, but we've also been contacted by an advocacy organization called Rights Now Disability Justice. They've been monitoring the situation here for approximately 2 months." "Monitoring?" I said. "Greg reached out to them 6 weeks ago," Dennis said. "Claimed he was being systematically harassed and excluded by coworkers. They sent someone undercover as a temp worker to observe. That person has corroborated several of Greg's claims." My brain was trying to catch up. "Wait, you're saying someone was planted here to spy on us?" "To investigate claims of a hostile work environment," Patricia corrected, "which is legal when there are allegations of civil rights violations. I wasn't harassing him, I was trying to keep people safe." Dennis leaned back in his chair. "Let's go through some specific incidents. On October 3rd, you allegedly told Greg to stay out of the main aisles during peak hours because he was in the way. Did that happen?" I remembered. Greg had positioned himself right at the intersection of aisles 3 and 4, where we do most of the heavy equipment traffic. I told him it was dangerous for him to be there. Forklifts come through every couple minutes. "But you didn't tell non-disabled workers to avoid that area. They can move faster if something's coming." Patricia made a note. "October 17th. You refused to help Greg retrieve an item from a high shelf and told him to ask someone else. He was supposed to use the system, submit a request through the tablet for items he can't reach safely. That's the whole point of his accommodation. But when other coworkers ask you for help, you assist them. That's different." "How?" I was starting to sweat. "Look, Greg was hired to do inventory management, data entry, tracking shipments, scanning items. He wasn't supposed to be pulling stock or operating equipment. Every time I saw him doing something outside his job description, I told him to stop because it wasn't safe." Dennis pulled out his own folder. "We have witness statements from 4 employees saying you made comments about Greg being a liability, that you openly speculated about how long until he hurt someone, that you discouraged others from helping him because it encouraged his dangerous behavior. Because it did. He thought he could do whatever he wanted and people would just accommodate it. Did you ever speak to Greg directly about your concerns?" Patricia asked. "I told him multiple times to stay in his zone, to use the proper procedures. Did you ever ask him why he felt the need to go beyond his assigned duties?" I stared at her. "That's not my job. That's Janet's job." Janet, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke. "Greg came to me multiple times saying he felt isolated and excluded, that other workers treated him like he was incompetent. I tried to address it in team meetings, but the hostile environment continued." "Hostile environment?" I turned to look at her. "Aisha has a broken ankle because of him." "That was an accident," Janet said. "An accident that wouldn't have happened if he'd stayed at his desk doing his actual job." Dennis held up a hand. "The incident with Aisha is under separate investigation. Right now, we're focused on the pattern of behavior toward Greg that created conditions where he felt he had to prove himself capable." The room felt too small. "You're blaming me for him being reckless?" "We're saying your treatment of him may have contributed to a hostile work environment that the company is legally liable for," Patricia said. "The Americans with Disabilities Act is very clear about this." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. Dennis continued. "Rights Now Disability Justice is prepared to file a lawsuit unless we take immediate corrective action. They have documentation of multiple ADA violations, harassment, and what they're calling a culture of ableism in this facility." "This is insane." "The optics are very bad," Dennis said flatly. "We have a disabled employee who repeatedly reported feeling unsafe and unwelcome. We have documented incidents of workers, including you, treating him differently than non-disabled employees. We have evidence that management failed to address his complaints adequately. And then a near-miss incident with you almost hitting him with a pallet jack, followed by a serious injury to another worker that occurred while he was trying to perform basic job functions." "He wasn't trying to perform basic job functions. He was doing stuff he wasn't trained for, because he felt he needed to prove his worth in a hostile workplace," Patricia said. "That's how their lawyer will frame it." Janet's voice was quiet. "Corporate wants this to go away quietly." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" Dennis closed his folder. "We're offering you a choice. You can resign effective immediately with a neutral reference and 2 months severance, or we can proceed with termination for cause based on the harassment allegations." The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere a phone was ringing. "You're firing me." "We're giving you the option to resign," Patricia said, "which looks better for future employment." I didn't do anything wrong. You created a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior toward a protected employee, Dennis said. Whether you intended it that way or not doesn't matter. The impact is what counts. My phone buzzed again, then again. I need to think about this, I said. You have until the end of business today, Dennis said, standing up. The 2 p.m. meeting is still happening. Greg will be there with his lawyer and a representative from Rights Now. If you choose to resign, you won't need to attend. If you choose termination, you'll need to be there to hear the formal allegations. He left. Patricia gathered her papers. This is bullshit, I said to Janet. You know this is bullshit. She finally met my eyes. I know you thought you were doing the right thing, but you went over my head to HR. You threatened to go to OSHA. You made this a legal issue instead of letting me handle it internally. You weren't handling it. I was trying to balance Greg's needs with everyone else's safety. It's not as simple as you think. Aisha's ankle seems pretty simple to me. Janet's expression hardened. Aisha isn't suing us. Greg is ready to. That's the difference. She left me alone in the conference room. I pulled out my phone. 7 texts from coworkers, 3 from Darren. Dude, what's happening? Greg's in the break room with some lawyer-looking guy. Everyone's saying you're getting fired. 1 from Marcus in receiving. This is fucked up, man. We all know you were right. 1 from Bethany, who worked Greg's shift. Maybe you should have minded your own business. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring at the fake wood grain of the conference table. Then I got up and walked back to the warehouse floor. Greg was exactly where I'd left him, still holding that folder. He saw me coming and his expression shifted to something like nervousness. Can we actually talk now? I said. Without an audience. He glanced around. A few people were definitely watching. Okay. We went to the loading dock 3, which was empty between truck schedules. Cold air blew in through the open bay door. Greg wheeled himself around to face me. I'm probably getting fired, I said. So I've got nothing to lose. I need to understand something. Do you actually think you didn't do anything wrong, or is this all some strategy your lawyer cooked up? He was quiet for a moment. You want me to be honest? Yeah. I think you treated me like a problem from day one. I think you saw the wheelchair and decided I didn't belong here. I think you used safety as an excuse to exclude me from being part of the team. That's not true, isn't it? His voice got louder. You know how many times I asked you for help with something and you told me to figure it out myself? How many times you took a different route just to avoid having to interact with me? I documented all of it, because you were constantly doing unsafe things. According to you, not according to Janet, not according to anyone else. Aisha's ankle was an accident. Greg's hands slammed on his armrests. I feel horrible about it, but accidents happen in warehouses. Or do they only count as accidents when non-disabled people cause them? That's not fair. None of this is fair, he said. I got hired for a job I'm qualified for. I have a master's degree in supply chain management. I worked at 2 other warehouses before this. I know what I'm doing. But from week 1, you and half the other workers treated me like I was helpless, or stupid or dangerous just because I use a chair. I never said you were stupid. You didn't have to say it. I saw it in your face every time I tried to do anything beyond sitting at my desk. The eye rolls, the heavy sighs, the way you'd position yourself between me and whatever I was trying to reach like I was a child about to touch a hot stove. My jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. People could have gotten hurt. People could get hurt any day in a warehouse. That's why we have safety protocols, which I followed. Unlike you, who decided your personal judgment of my capabilities was more important than actual policies. The electric pallet jack, I requested training for it 3 times. Janet kept putting me off. So yes, I tried to learn it myself because I was tired of being limited to baby tasks while everyone else got to do actual warehouse work. You're in a wheelchair. And? He leaned forward. That's it? That's your whole argument? I'm in a wheelchair, so I should just accept being sidelined? I'm saying there are some things that are legitimately harder or more dangerous for you. Then the company should properly assess what those things are and provide appropriate accommodations. Not have random coworkers like you make those decisions based on your gut feelings about disability. I didn't have a response to that. Greg's lawyer had probably coached him on every word, but he also seemed genuinely angry in a way that felt real. The 2 p.m. meeting, Greg said. My lawyer wants me to push for your termination. Rights Now wants to make an example out of this facility. But honestly, I'm tired. I just want to come to work and do my job without feeling like everyone's waiting for me to screw up. That's what I wanted too. To do my job without worrying you were going to hurt yourself or someone else. Then why didn't you talk to me? Like an actual person. Instead of going behind my back to HR, you went behind my back to a disability rights organization and had them plant a spy here. After 6 weeks of trying to address it through normal channels and being ignored, he shot back. What was I supposed to do? We stared at each other. The loading dock was getting colder. I don't know, I finally said. I don't know what either of us was supposed to do differently. Greg's expression softened slightly. The thing is, you're not entirely wrong. I was pushing boundaries, testing limits, trying to prove I could do more than everyone assumed. And yeah, maybe some of that was reckless. The thing with Aisha, I replay that moment every night. The sound she made when she fell. He looked down at his hands. But I was also drowning here. Every day feeling like I had to justify my existence. Like if I just sat at my desk and did the bare minimum, people would say, see, that's all disabled people can do. So I pushed harder, maybe too hard. Aisha could have been hurt worse. I know. And I have to live with that. Just like you have to live with whatever happens after 2 p.m. My phone buzzed. Text from Janet. What's your decision? I looked at Greg. If I resign, what happens to you? I keep my job. The company settles with rights now, probably agrees to some training and policy updates. Life goes on. And if I don't resign? They fire you anyway, but it's uglier. Goes on your record. Harder to get another job. But it also means they have to admit to a formal finding of harassment, which might actually force real changes here. Greg tilted his head. You take the worse option just to make a point? Maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what the right thing is, and I honestly have no idea anymore. We sat in silence. A truck pulled up to loading dock 4, backup beeper echoing off the concrete. For what it's worth, Greg said, I don't think you're a bad person. I think you're scared of liability and change. I think you have fixed ideas about what disabled people can and can't do. But I don't think you wake up hating people like me. Thanks, I guess. I'm just saying you've got a choice to make. You can fight this and probably lose and make everything messier. Or you can take the severance, learn something from this and move on. What am I supposed to learn? That trying to keep people safe makes me the villain? That safety isn't just physical, he said quietly. That making someone feel excluded and unwelcome every day is its own kind of harm. That intentions don't erase impact. My phone buzzed again. Decision needed ASAP, Janet wrote. I thought about Aisha, home with her broken ankle, counting down to retirement. I thought about the other workers who'd texted me support. I thought about my own mortgage payment and job prospects. I thought about Greg's folder full of documented evidence of every time I'd treated him differently. If I resign, I said slowly, do you promise to be more careful? To actually follow the safety protocols instead of trying to prove points? If the company actually accommodates me properly and stops treating me like a liability waiting to happen, then yes. It wasn't enough. It didn't feel fair. But nothing about this situation was fair. I pulled out my phone and texted Janet, I'll resign, drawing up the paperwork. Greg nodded slowly. I'm sorry it ended up this way. Are you, though? He considered that. I'm sorry you felt like going to HR was your only option. I'm sorry the company put us in a position where this was inevitable. I'm not sorry for standing up for myself. Yeah. Well, I stood up. Good luck with everything. You too. I walked back through the warehouse for what I knew would be one of the last times. People watched me pass. Some looked sympathetic. Some looked away. Bethany gave me a small wave and I ignored her. The HR office had the paperwork ready. They'd already written it up before I even made my decision. Patricia walked me through it. 2-month severance. Neutral reference. Non-disclosure agreement about the circumstances of my departure. Sign here, initial here, date here. You're making the right choice, she said, which felt like a slap. I signed everything. Handed back the pen. Am I allowed to get my stuff? You have 15 minutes. Security will escort you. Of course they would. My locker had 3 years' worth of accumulated junk. Extra work boots, a coffee mug Aisha gave me last Christmas, protein bars I kept forgetting to eat, family photo magnets on the inside of the door. Darren found me while I was packing. Man, this is so screwed up. Yep, you were just trying to do the right thing. Apparently that's not how corporate sees it. Everyone knows Greg was being reckless. Everyone saw it. Didn't matter. He helped me carry my box out to my car. The security guard followed at a discreet distance like I might steal office supplies or something. The parking lot was gray concrete and cold wind. My car looked smaller than I remembered. What are you going to do? Darren asked. No idea. Update my resume, I guess. Figure out how to explain this to my wife. If you need a reference, I'll vouch for you. Thanks, but I don't think that's going to help much. I put the box in my trunk. Darren stood there awkwardly, like he wanted to say something meaningful but couldn't find the words. Take care of yourself, I finally said. You too, man. This isn't right. I drove home in the middle of the day, which felt wrong. I should be at work. Should be scanning packages or moving pallets or doing literally anything productive. Instead, I was unemployed because I'd tried to prevent someone from getting hurt. My wife Claudia was home, working remotely from the kitchen table. She looked up when I walked in. "You're home early. Are you sick?" "I got fired." Her expression went from confused to alarmed. "What?" I told her everything. The incident with Aisha, my report to HR, Greg's counter-complaint, the meeting with corporate, the choice I'd been given. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I loved about her. She processed before reacting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "So," she finally said, "they're calling it harassment because you pointed out safety violations? They're calling it harassment because I treated Greg differently than other workers, because he was doing dangerous things, because he's disabled and I made assumptions about what he could handle." Claudia frowned. "Did you, though? Or were you just being realistic about workplace safety? I don't know anymore. That's the problem." Greg made some valid points about feeling excluded, about me avoiding him and refusing to help with things I'd help other people with. Were you doing that? I thought about it honestly. Yeah, I was, because every interaction with him felt like a potential incident waiting to happen, so I started limiting those interactions. That seems logical to me, but it also meant he felt isolated and unwelcome, which made him try harder to prove himself, which led to riskier behavior, which led to Aisha getting hurt. That's not your fault. Corporate thinks it partially is, or at least, they think it's easier to make me the scapegoat than to deal with a discrimination lawsuit. Claudia got up and made coffee, which was her way of processing stress. "What does the severance look like? 2 months' pay? We'll be okay for a bit. I'll need to find something new pretty quick, though." "And the reference?" "Neutral, which basically means future employers will read between the lines." She handed me a mug. "This is bullshit." "Yeah, you were trying to keep people safe." "I know. And now you're being punished for it." "That's one way to look at it." She sat back down. "What's the other way?" I sipped the coffee. It was too hot. "That I made a disabled coworker's life miserable by treating him like he was incompetent. That I created a hostile work environment. That my version of keeping people safe was actually just discrimination with extra steps." "You don't actually believe that." "I don't know what I believe anymore." We sat in silence for a while. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, someone was using a leaf blower even though it was too cold for leaves. "I need to call my dad," I said. "He's going to have opinions." "Your dad always has opinions." I made the call, got the expected reaction. Dad had worked construction for 40 years and had zero patience for what he called corporate nonsense. "They're protecting their asses," he said. "Nothing to do with right or wrong. It's all about money and lawsuits." "I know. You got anything lined up?" "Not yet. Just happened today." "Well, don't wait around. Economy's garbage. Jobs don't stay open long." "Thanks, Dad. Real encouraging." "I'm being realistic. You got bills, you got a mortgage. Severance runs out fast." After I hung up, Claudia looked at me. "He's not wrong about starting the search immediately." "I know. I just need a minute to process that 3 years of work ended because I filled out an incident report." "Do you regret reporting him?" I thought about Aisha, about the broken ankle, about how close that pallet jack incident had been. "No, but I might regret how I handled everything else." That night I couldn't sleep, kept replaying moments from the past 6 months. Times I'd seen Greg struggling with something and walked past instead of helping. Times I'd heard other workers complaining about him and agreed instead of defending him. Times I'd made assumptions about what he could or couldn't do based purely on the wheelchair. But also times he'd rolled into dangerous areas without looking. Times he'd attempted to use equipment he wasn't trained on. Times he'd brushed off safety concerns with jokes. Who was right? Who was wrong? Maybe it wasn't that simple. Around 2 a.m. I got up and checked the warehouse Facebook group. Someone had posted about my departure. The comments were a war zone. "Good riddance. Dude had it out for Greg from day one. This is insane. They fired someone for trying to prevent injuries? He didn't get fired, he resigned." Big difference. Only resigned because they threatened him. Maybe if he'd treated Greg like a human being instead of a liability. Maybe if Greg had stayed in his lane, Aisha wouldn't have a broken ankle. Back and forth. Everyone had an opinion. Nobody had the full picture. I closed Facebook and tried to sleep. The next morning I updated my resume. Tried to figure out how to list my departure. Resigned due to philosophical differences with management sounded pretentious. Left to pursue other opportunities sounded fake. Forced out for reporting safety violations sounded bitter and would torpedo any reference check. I went with seeking new challenges and hated myself a little. Spent the afternoon applying to other warehouses, logistics companies, anything remotely related to my experience. Most applications had a question about reason for leaving previous employment. I left it vague. Darren texted me, "Dude, the 2 p.m. meeting was crazy. Greg brought his whole legal team. Janet looked like she was going to cry." They're implementing all these new policies about disability accommodations and harassment prevention. Good, I texted back. Feels weird without you here, though. Like they got rid of the wrong person. I didn't know how to respond to that. A few days later, Aisha called me. I almost didn't answer because I wasn't ready for whatever she had to say. I heard what happened, she said. That's not right. It is what it is. You were trying to prevent exactly what happened to me. Yeah, well, apparently that makes me a discriminatory harasser. I gave a statement to HR, she said. Told them Greg was operating that cart recklessly. Told them I don't blame you for anything. For whatever that's worth. Thank you. Really. They told me they're setting up a fund to cover my medical expenses and lost wages, making sure my retirement isn't impacted. Greg himself called to apologize about 6 times. That's good. It doesn't bring back my ankle, though. I'm going to be in this boot for another 8 weeks minimum. Physical therapy after that. Might not ever walk the same. My chest felt tight. I'm sorry. Not your fault. And hey, at least they're finally taking safety seriously. Installing new protocols, better training, actual enforcement. Took someone getting hurt and someone getting fired to make it happen. Forced to resign. Whatever. Point is, change is happening. Doesn't make it right how they handled you, but at least something good might come from it. After we hung up, I sat with that for a while. Something good might come from it. Didn't make me feel better. Week 2 of unemployment, I had a phone interview with a logistics company an hour away. It went okay until they asked about my previous position. I see you left after 3 years. Can you tell me about that transition? I resigned to pursue other opportunities. And your previous supervisor will provide a reference? They'll provide a neutral reference, yes. Long pause. Is there anything about your departure we should be aware of? Nothing that would impact my ability to do this job. Another pause. We'll be in touch. They never called back. The same thing happened 3 more times. As soon as places called for references and got Janet's carefully neutral non-endorsement, the opportunities dried up. Claudia tried to be supportive, but I could see the stress building. Our savings would cover maybe 4 months. After that, we'd be in trouble. Maybe you should apply outside the warehouse sector, she suggested. Retail management? Something in logistics that's not floor work? With what qualifications? My whole resume is warehouse experience. You're smart. You're reliable. Those skills transfer. Apparently not when your last employer basically signals you were a problem employee. I was getting bitter. I could hear it in my own voice. Month 3 came with more rejection emails. A few interviews that went nowhere. One promising lead at a smaller operation that actually seemed interested until they called Janet and suddenly had filled the position internally. I started driving for a delivery service to bring in something. $10 an hour plus gas. 14-hour days delivering packages to people who either didn't tip or tipped $1. My back started hurting from all the lifting. Claudia hated seeing me come home exhausted for basically minimum wage. This isn't sustainable, she said. I know. Maybe you need to consult with a lawyer. See if you have a wrongful termination case. I resigned. Remember? Under duress, though. I looked into it. Talked to an employment lawyer who reviewed my situation for free over the phone. It's tough, he said. You resigned rather than being terminated. They gave you severance. There's a signed NDA. Fighting it would be expensive with a low chance of success. So I'm just screwed. You're in a difficult position. The ADA protects employees from discrimination, but it also protects disabled employees from harassment. From their perspective, they were correcting a liability. From yours, you were reporting legitimate safety concerns. It's messy. Yeah, I've noticed. My advice? Move on. Find something new. Learn from this and be more careful in future workplaces about how you interact with protected classes. Protected classes. Like Greg was some special category instead of just another worker. But maybe that was exactly the attitude that got me here. I found out through the warehouse Facebook group that Greg was still working there, that he'd been promoted to senior inventory analyst with an actual team under him, that the new safety protocols were working well, that Aisha had returned on light duty and would be retiring in 6 weeks with a full pension plus a settlement from the company. Good for them, I guess. I finally got a break when an old coworker from my first warehouse job, before the place I'd just left, reached out. He was managing a small distribution center for a medical supply company. I heard you were looking, he said. We've got an opening for a floor supervisor. It's a pay cut from what you were making, but it's steady work. Why me? I'm sure you heard what happened. I heard their version. I also worked with you for 2 years and know you're solid. So I'm asking you directly, what's the real story? I told him everything. Didn't sugarcoat it. Explained about Greg, about my concerns, about how it all went sideways. He listened. Okay, so you had a safety concern, reported it. and got burned because the disabled employee had better documentation and a lawyer. That's the short version, yeah. The medical supply industry is heavily regulated. We have strict safety protocols that everyone has to follow regardless of circumstances. If you came here and treated someone differently due to disability, we'd have a problem. But if you enforced safety rules equally and documented everything properly, we'd back you up. I'm not looking to start another war. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking if you can follow our policies, treat all employees fairly within those policies, and not let personal feelings override procedures. Could I? That was the question. Yeah, I said. I think I can. Good. When can you start? The new job paid about 15% less than my old position, but it was something. The facility was smaller, maybe 30 employees total, more intimate, which meant I got to know everyone pretty quick, including Vanessa, who had muscular dystrophy and used a motorized wheelchair in the office area. She handled customer service and order processing. First week, I watched how the manager, Ellis, handled accommodations. Vanessa had a custom desk setup. When she needed something from the warehouse floor, there was a clear protocol. She'd submit a request through the system, someone would retrieve it and bring it to the loading area where she could access it. Simple, clear, no ambiguity. We set it up this way, Ellis explained, because we had issues before. People either helicoptering around disabled employees or ignoring them entirely. This way everyone knows the procedure and there's no room for personal interpretation. It worked. Vanessa never felt excluded but also never put herself in dangerous situations. The system protected everyone. I couldn't help comparing it to the setup at my old job, where Greg's accommodations seemed ad hoc and poorly defined, leaving room for exactly the kind of conflict that had exploded. Vanessa and I got along fine. She was funny, competent, and seemed to have no chip on her shoulder about her disability. A couple months in, we grabbed lunch together with some other coworkers. Ellis mentioned you had some trouble at your last place, she said casually. Something about a disabled worker? Here we go, I thought. Yeah, it got complicated. I've been in those situations, she said, where nobody knows how to interact with you because they're terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. So they either avoid you or treat you like glass. Both suck. What's the right approach? She shrugged. Treat me like anyone else within the bounds of obvious physical limitations. If you need to ask me something about my capabilities, ask directly instead of assuming. If I'm doing something unsafe, tell me just like you would anyone else. Don't tiptoe. Don't overprotect. Just be normal. Sounds simple when you say it like that. It is simple. People make it complicated by overthinking it. She sipped her coffee. What happened at your old place? I gave her the summary. She listened without interrupting. So the company failed to set clear boundaries for his role, she said when I finished. He pushed against those unclear boundaries. You tried to enforce safety rules that may or may not have been actual policies. Things escalated. Nobody handled it well. That's probably the fairest assessment I've heard. You learn from it though, right? Like, you're not going to make the same mistakes here? I'm trying not to. Then it wasn't a total waste. Just an expensive education. That became my mantra. Expensive education. 6 months into the new job, I got a LinkedIn message from Greg. I hope things are going well for you. I wanted to reach out because I've been thinking about everything that happened. I know we both felt like victims in that situation. I'm not looking to rehash it or assign blame. Just wanted to say I hope you landed on your feet. I stared at that message for 3 days before responding. Thanks for reaching out. I did land on my feet eventually. New job, good people. I've learned a lot. I hope you're doing well too. He responded immediately. I am. The company made a lot of changes after you left. Better safety training, clearer accommodation policies, actual enforcement. It's a better place to work now for everyone. That's good to hear. For what it's worth, I realize I was pushing too hard, trying to prove something instead of just doing my job. The thing with Aisha still haunts me. I'm glad she's okay. She's retired now. Last I heard, she's doing fine. That's good. Listen, I know this is awkward, but I wanted you to know I didn't feel good about how it ended. You weren't entirely wrong about everything. Neither were you. Yeah. Anyway, take care. I closed LinkedIn and thought about that conversation for the rest of the day. Nobody was entirely wrong. Nobody was entirely right. Just people making imperfect decisions in messy situations. A year after leaving my old job, Claudia and I were doing okay. Money was tighter, but we were stable. I'd gotten a small raise at the medical supply place, made some friends, figured out how to do my job without creating conflicts. Darren texted me occasionally with updates from the old warehouse. Janet had been transferred to a different facility. New management came in with fresh ideas. Greg was apparently thriving, had won some employee award for implementing a new inventory tracking system. Place isn't the same without you, Darren wrote. But also it's different in good ways. I didn't know how to feel about that. One afternoon, Vanessa rolled into the break room where I was eating lunch. "Got a question for you. I'm thinking about submitting a proposal to expand my role to include some light warehouse coordination. Would involve me being on the floor more. What do you think? What does the proposal include for safety? Clear zones where I'd operate, additional training, modified equipment where needed, specific tasks that fit within my capabilities. Sounds well thought out. Ellis wants a second opinion from someone with floor management experience. Would you review it?" I read through her proposal that evening. It was thorough. Detailed risk assessments, clear protocols, acknowledgement of limitations with practical workarounds. "This is good," I told her the next day. "Really good. If you'd had something like this at my old place, half the problems wouldn't have happened. Thanks. I learned from watching other people's mistakes." She smiled. "No offense." "None taken." Ellis approved the proposal. Vanessa's expanded role worked smoothly because everyone knew exactly what was expected. No ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. I thought about Greg often, about whether things could have been different if someone had just written out clear expectations from day one. If the company had taken accommodation seriously instead of leaving it to individual interpretation. If I'd talked to him directly instead of going around him. If. 2 years later, I was assistant operations manager at the medical supply warehouse. Claudia was pregnant with our first kid. Life had moved on. I still thought about that day in HR sometimes, about the choice I'd been given, about whether I'd made the right decision. But mostly, I thought about what Vanessa said. Expensive education. I'd learned that safety and accommodation aren't opposing forces. That being right about one thing doesn't make you right about everything. That intentions matter, but impact matters more. And that sometimes the villain in someone else's story is just a person trying their best and getting it wrong. Last month, I hired a new warehouse associate who used crutches due to a childhood injury. Before his first day, I sat down with him and Ellis, and we went through every single aspect of his job, what he'd be expected to do, what accommodations we could provide, what safety protocols applied to everyone, no exceptions. "Any questions?" I asked when we finished. He looked relieved. "No. This is the clearest anyone's ever been about expectations. Usually places either baby me or throw me in the deep end. We're aiming for neither," I said. "We want you to succeed, which means setting you up properly from the start." Ellis nodded. "And if something isn't working, we address it directly. No assumptions, no behind-the-back complaints, just honest communication." "That works for me," the guy said. And it did work. Still does. He's been here 8 months now, doing great. I wonder sometimes if Greg and I could have had that conversation at the start. If things might have been different with clear communication and mutual respect instead of assumptions and resentment. But I'll never know. That's the thing about expensive educations. You can't retake the test. You can only apply what you learned going forward. So that's what I'm doing. Trying to be better. Trying to create workplaces where safety and inclusion aren't opposites. Where disabled workers aren't treated like problems or heroes, just workers with specific needs and capabilities like everyone else. It's not perfect. There are still moments of uncertainty, still times when I second-guess myself, but I haven't had to choose between my conscience and my job again. And nobody's gotten hurt on my watch. I call that progress. But let me back up, because there's a lot I left out about those 2 years between getting forced out and hiring that guy with crutches. The reality of what happened after I left that warehouse was messier and harder than I'm making it sound. Week 4 of unemployment, Claudia's car broke down. Transmission. $1,800 we didn't have. I was still doing the delivery gig, barely making enough to cover gas and car insurance. We had to borrow from her parents, which meant sitting through her dad's lecture about having an emergency fund and making better career decisions. "You should have just kept your head down," he said over dinner at their place, where we were eating because it saved us grocery money. "Workplace politics, you don't win by being right. You win by being smart." Claudia defended me, but I could see the stress in her face. The tension in our apartment was thick. Money fights started happening. Small stuff at first, like me buying energy drinks for long delivery shifts. "That's $4 you just wasted," she'd say. "I need caffeine to stay awake. We have coffee here. I can't bring a thermos on delivery routes." Back and forth. Stupid arguments about money that were really about fear. The delivery job was breaking me down physically, too. My knees started acting up from all the stairs. Apartments in our city don't have elevators, and I was running up 4 or 5 flights multiple times a day with armfuls of packages. Started taking ibuprofen daily just to keep moving. Month 5, I got a call back from a warehouse in the next county. Decent pay, similar work to what I knew. The interview went well. Floor manager seemed reasonable. They called my references, called Janet, got a rejection email 2 days later. Decided to go with a candidate who better fits our current needs. I called the floor manager directly, which you're not supposed to do, but I was desperate. Look, I said, I know what my last supervisor probably said. I need you to understand the full situation. He was quiet for a second. Your former employer provided a reference indicating you resigned following concerns about your interaction with a disabled coworker. They didn't elaborate, but they also didn't recommend you for rehire. That's all we needed to hear. That's not the full story. Maybe not, but it's enough of a story that we're going to pass. I'm sorry. I threw my phone across the room, cracked the screen, had to use it for another 3 months before we could afford to replace it. Reminder of that moment every time I looked at it. Claudia started picking up extra shifts at her job. She worked admin at a dentist's office, and they let her do evening hours answering phones and scheduling. She'd come home at 9 p.m. exhausted, and I'd be sitting there having made maybe $60 from deliveries that day. This isn't working, she said one night. Just flat out. We can't live like this. I'm trying. I know you're trying, but trying isn't paying our bills. You need to expand your search. Look outside warehouses. Consider retail management. Something. My whole career is warehouse logistics. Then your whole career just ended and you need a new one. She wasn't wrong. But acknowledging that felt like admitting complete failure. I started applying to retail stores. Got an interview at a big box electronics place for assistant manager. The guy interviewing me was maybe 25, kept calling me sir even though I asked him not to. So you have warehouse experience, he said, looking at my resume. That's great, but this role requires someone who can drive sales, not just manage inventory. I can learn sales. Can you though? Because our customer interaction philosophy is pretty specific. We need someone who's naturally enthusiastic about technology. I tried to be enthusiastic. I smiled. I talked about how I'd always been good with computers. He looked unconvinced. I think you'd be great in our warehouse, actually. We have an opening for warehouse associate. Entry level, but it's something. Entry level, $12 an hour. I'd been making $23 at my last job. I took it. The electronics warehouse was climate controlled, which was nice, but the work was mind-numbing. Scanning barcodes, moving boxes, following exact procedures with zero autonomy. My manager was a 19-year-old kid who'd never worked anywhere else and loved to remind everyone about policy compliance. Hey man, he'd say, I need you to pick up the pace a little. Your scanning rate is below target. I was 34 years old, taking orders from a teenager who still lived with his parents. 2 months in, someone asked me to help move a heavy appliance that was in the wrong zone. I started to help, then stopped. Is there a protocol for this? I asked. The guy looked confused. Protocol? It's just moving a box. Right, but what's the official procedure for cross-zone inventory transfers? Dude, I don't know, just help me move it. I helped him move it, hands shaking slightly. Kept thinking about Greg, about accommodation, about following procedures, about how my career had ended because I'd cared too much about rules and not enough about people. Or maybe it was the opposite. Couldn't tell anymore. Claudia got pregnant around month 7 of the electronics warehouse job. We were happy, mostly, but also terrified. Her insurance was decent, but adding a baby meant more expenses, more pressure, more everything. We'll figure it out, she kept saying. But I could see her doing mental math every time she looked at baby stuff online. My mom called weekly asking how the job search was going. I stopped telling her the truth. Yeah, got some leads, became my standard response. You'll land something good soon, honey. You're talented. Was I, though? I'd torpedoed my own career over a principle that nobody else seemed to think mattered. The warehouse Facebook group drama continued for months. People would tag me in comment threads asking for my side of the story. I never responded. The NDA technically prevented me from discussing details, but also what was the point? Someone posted that Greg had been featured in a local business magazine article about disability inclusion in the workplace. There was a photo of him at his desk, smiling, with a caption about overcoming obstacles and changing workplace culture. The comments were brutal. Overcame obstacles by getting the guy who called out his dangerous behavior fired. Corporate propaganda. They're using him as a shield. Maybe if Greg had stayed in his lane, Aisha wouldn't have a broken ankle. Maybe if people treated Greg like a human being instead of a liability, he wouldn't have felt the need to prove himself. Round and round. Same arguments. No resolution. I stopped following the group. Aisha friend requested me on Facebook around month 8. I accepted. She posted a lot of photos of her grandkids and inspirational quotes about resilience. Her profile picture showed her standing with a cane, out of the boot, finally. She messaged me directly. "How are you holding up? Managing? You? Better. Ankle's healing. Got my settlement from the company. Officially retired now." "That's great. Look, I know you're probably done talking about this, but I wanted you to know I've been thinking about it a lot. About what happened. And I don't think you were wrong to be concerned. But I was wrong in how I handled it. Maybe. Or maybe you were put in an impossible situation where every choice was wrong. Company should have had better policies from day one. Should have supported both you and Greg properly instead of leaving you all to figure it out." "Yeah. What are you doing now?" "Warehouse work at an electronics place." "You're overqualified for that. Turns out being right doesn't matter if you can't prove it in a way that protects you legally." Brutal lesson. Expensive one. We messaged a few more times over the following weeks. She'd send me job postings occasionally. Most of them went nowhere, but it felt good to have someone in my corner who understood the situation. Month 9, the electronics warehouse had a company meeting about their new diversity and inclusion initiative. They'd hired a consultant to come talk to us about unconscious bias and creating welcoming environments for all employees. The consultant, a woman named Patricia, which made me irrationally angry because of the HR Patricia from my old job, stood in front of us with a PowerPoint about microaggressions and accommodation. "Has anyone here ever made assumptions about a coworker's capabilities based on visible characteristics?" she asked. Everyone stayed quiet. "It's okay to acknowledge this. We all do it. The key is recognizing these patterns and correcting them." She showed a video about a wheelchair user in an office setting. The narrator talked about how coworkers often either ignored the disabled employee or overhelped them, creating isolation either way. I felt physically sick watching it. During the break, the 19-year-old manager found me. "Heavy stuff, right?" "Yeah. Makes you think about how you treat people." I wanted to scream. Wanted to tell him he had no idea what it was like to try to treat someone fairly, while also keeping them safe, while also following rules that didn't actually exist, while also protecting yourself legally. But I just nodded. "Yeah," I said. "Really makes you think." The electronics job lasted 11 months before I found the medical supply position through my old coworker. That was the lifeline I needed. Not just for the money, though that mattered, but for the chance to do the work I actually knew how to do. Ellis, the manager there, had his own story about workplace accommodation gone wrong. His brother had autism and worked in food service until a manager decided he was too slow and fired him without proper documentation. "Lawsuit took 3 years, Ellis told me over coffee during my second week. "Brother won, got a settlement, but the stress of it destroyed him mentally. Hasn't worked since." "That's rough." "Yeah. So when I got into management, I made a promise to myself. Every accommodation would be clearly documented. Every expectation spelled out. No room for interpretation or personal feelings. That's what was missing at my last place. Most places don't think about this stuff until there's a problem. Then they panic and overcorrect. Make everything about protecting the company instead of doing right by employees. So how do you balance it? Safety and accommodation?" Ellis thought about it. "You don't balance it like they're opposing forces. You build systems where both are embedded into the infrastructure. Safety protocols that everyone follows. Accommodations that are built into job descriptions from day one. Clear communication channels for when something isn't working." It sounded so simple when he said it like that. Vanessa, the coworker with muscular dystrophy, became a good friend over that first year. She was direct in a way I appreciated. When I was too careful around her, she called me out. "You're doing that thing where you're overcompensating," she said one day when I'd asked her 3 times if she needed help with something basic. "Sorry, I'm trying not to assume you can't do things. I get it, but asking constantly is just another form of assuming I'm helpless. If I need help, I'll ask. Otherwise, treat me like you'd treat anyone else." How do you know when someone's being genuinely helpful versus condescending? Usually by whether they ask before helping and whether they accept my answer. If I say I'm good and they help anyway, that's condescending. If they ask, listen, and respect my response, that's helpful. Simple rules. Why hadn't anyone taught me this before everything exploded? Claudia gave birth to our son, Marcus, right before my 1-year anniversary at the medical supply place. The delivery was complicated, emergency C-section, and we ended up with hospital bills even after insurance that took us 2 years to fully pay off. But Marcus was healthy, loud, demanding, covered in baby acne. Perfect. Being a dad changed my perspective on the Greg situation in ways I hadn't expected. When Marcus was about 3 months old, screaming at 2 a.m. because he was colicky and nothing soothed him, I thought about responsibility, about wanting to protect something fragile, about making judgment calls with incomplete information and hoping you're doing the right thing. I'd wanted to protect my coworkers. That wasn't wrong. But I'd approached it in a way that caused harm to someone else. That wasn't right either. Both things could be true simultaneously. Darren stopped texting updates from the old warehouse around month 15. Last I heard through mutual friends, he'd taken a job somewhere else. The turnover at that place had apparently skyrocketed after everything went down. New management, new policies, same old problems just with different faces. Greg was still there though, still thriving apparently. I'd see his occasional LinkedIn updates about process improvements or team achievements. Never interacted with them, just observed from a distance. His message when he finally reached out, that note about hoping I landed on my feet, came at an interesting time. Marcus was 6 months old. I'd just been promoted to shift supervisor at the medical supply warehouse. Things were stable. I almost didn't respond. What was the point? But then I thought about Marcus, about what kind of person I wanted to be for him, and I wrote back something brief and neutral. Greg's response surprised me. The admission that he'd been pushing too hard, that Aisha's injury haunted him, that I wasn't entirely wrong. I read it to Claudia that night after Marcus finally fell asleep. "How does that make you feel?" she asked. "Like the past 2 years were a waste. Like if we'd had this conversation back then, maybe everything would be different. Or maybe you both needed to go through what you went through to get to this point." Expensive way to learn a lesson. Most important lessons are. Year 2 at the medical supply place, I started training new hires. Part of my responsibility was making sure they understood safety protocols and accommodation policies. I created a whole orientation module about it, worked with Ellis to get it approved by corporate. One of my first trainees was a guy named Javier, who had hearing loss and used hearing aids. First day, I made sure I faced him when talking, spoke clearly, and asked if he needed any specific accommodations for our training sessions. "This is the first job where someone asked me that during orientation," he said. "Usually, people just get frustrated when I ask them to repeat things." We worked out a system where I'd provide written documentation of all training materials in addition to verbal instruction. Took me an extra hour to prep for each session, but it worked. Javier excelled. 6 months later, he was training other people. That became my thing. The guy who was good at onboarding diverse hires. Corporate noticed. Asked me to present at a regional management meeting about inclusion practices. Standing in front of 30 managers talking about accommodation felt surreal. I told them about systems and protocols, about clear communication and documented expectations. I didn't tell them about Greg, about getting forced out of my last job, about 2 years of struggling to rebuild a career. But it was all there, underneath everything I said. One manager raised his hand during Q&A. "What do you do when an accommodation request conflicts with safety requirements?" You document the specific safety concern, work with the employee and their medical provider to find alternative solutions, and you get everything in writing. You never make unilateral decisions based on your personal assessment of their capabilities. Even if you think they're putting themselves at risk? Especially then. That's when you need clear protocols and professional medical guidance, not gut feelings. Speaking from experience, though I didn't say that part. The presentation went well enough that corporate asked me to help develop company-wide training materials. Extra work, but also extra pay, and it gave me a sense of purpose beyond daily warehouse operations. Marcus turned 1, then 2. Claudia went back to work part-time. We bought a decent used car to replace her old one that had finally died. Paid off the hospital bills. Built back our emergency fund. Small victories that felt huge after years of struggling. I ran into Janet at a grocery store when Marcus was about 2.5. She was in line ahead of me, didn't notice me until I was right behind her. "Oh," she said, visibly uncomfortable. Hey. Awkward silence. She paid for her groceries. I should have just let her leave. But Marcus was being cute, grabbing at items on the conveyor belt, and she looked at him and smiled. "Yours?" she asked. "Yeah, this is Marcus. He's adorable." More awkward silence. "Look," she said finally. "I know how everything ended was messed up. I've thought about it a lot, about whether I could have handled things differently. Yeah, me too. For what it's worth, you weren't wrong about safety being an issue, but the way you went about addressing it created a bigger legal problem than the safety concern itself. I know that now. Greg and I had a long conversation after you left, about his behavior, about expectations, about how the situation got so out of control. He admitted he was pushing boundaries deliberately, trying to prove something. He told me that too. We talked briefly a while back." "You did?" She looked surprised. "How'd that go?" "Civil. Both acknowledged we messed up. No resolution really, just mutual acknowledgement that it was a shitty situation all around." Janet nodded. "I got transferred because of how I handled it. Corporate saw it as a management failure. New facility, fresh start, all that. Learned a lot from it, though. Expensive education, I said. The most expensive kind. She looked at Marcus again. I'm glad you're doing okay. You too. We went our separate ways. I told Claudia about it that night. How did it feel seeing her? Less angry than I expected. Just kind of sad about the whole thing. That's growth, I guess. Maybe. Or maybe just exhaustion with holding on to resentment. Year 3 at the medical supply warehouse, Ellis promoted me to assistant operations manager. Decent salary, better benefits, actual career progression. The promotion came with a new challenge. Hiring for a warehouse position that specifically needed to be filled by someone with relevant experience who could also handle physical demands of the work. We got an application from someone who listed a previous back injury, but said they were fully cleared for work with some restrictions. Rather than making assumptions, I called them in for an interview and brought our safety coordinator to the meeting. Walk me through your restrictions and how we can accommodate them, I said. The candidate, a woman named Tessa, had documentation from her doctor. Couldn't lift more than 30 pounds without assistance. Needed to take breaks for stretching every 2 hours. Could do all other aspects of the job without limitation. We modified the role slightly, paired her with a partner for heavy lifts, built the stretching breaks into the shift schedule, gave her a 6-month trial period with monthly check-ins. She was great. 3 years later, she's a senior warehouse associate and mentoring new hires. That's what I learned from the Greg situation. Not that I was right or wrong, but that individual judgment isn't enough. You need systems. You need documentation. You need clear communication and mutual understanding. And you need to check your own biases constantly. Because I had been biased against Greg, even though I didn't want to admit it at the time. I saw the wheelchair first and made assumptions about limitations second. I didn't trust him to know his own capabilities. I didn't communicate with him directly like an equal. Would Aisha still have gotten hurt if I'd done things differently? Maybe. Warehouses are dangerous. Accidents happen. But would I have lost my career over it? Probably not. The guy with crutches I hired, his name's Deshaun, and he's been with us for about a year now. He asked me once why I was so thorough with his onboarding, why I made sure everything was documented and clear. I gave him the short version. Made a mistake at a previous job. Learned the hard way that good intentions without good systems lead to bad outcomes. Appreciate you being real about it, he said. Most managers just give corporate speak. Corporate speak has its place, but so does learning from your mistakes. He nodded. For what it's worth, this is the best onboarding I've ever had. Feels like you actually want me to succeed instead of just covering your ass legally. Why not both? He laughed. Fair point. These days, I'm involved in hiring decisions across the whole facility. Ellis trusts my judgment. Corporate asks for my input on policy updates. I'm building the kind of career I thought I'd lost forever. Marcus is 3 now, starting to ask questions about what I do at work. I told him I help people do their jobs safely and well. Like a superhero? He asked. More like a really organized helper. He seemed satisfied with that answer. Claudia and I are trying for a second kid. Money's stable enough that we're not terrified of the idea anymore. We've got decent savings. The apartment's getting cramped, but we're talking about maybe buying a small house in the next few years. Normal life. The kind I'd taken for granted before everything fell apart. I still think about Greg sometimes. Wonder how he's doing. Whether he ever thinks about me or if I'm just a footnote in his own story about overcoming workplace discrimination. Both versions can be true. I can be the guy who tried to protect his coworkers and the guy who discriminated against a disabled employee. Greg can be a victim of ableism and someone who engaged in risky behavior. Aisha can be blameless in her injury and also someone who was hurt because of systemic failures. None of it's simple. All of it's true. Last month, Deshaun came to me with a concern about one of our newer hires, a kid fresh out of high school who kept taking shortcuts on safety procedures. I've mentioned it to him directly, Deshaun said, but he's not listening. I don't want to go over his head, but I also don't want someone to get hurt. Have you documented the specific incidents? Yeah. 3 times he's bypassed lockout procedures on the compactor. Twice he's left forklifts running unattended, and yesterday he was on his phone while operating the pallet jack. Okay, let me review your documentation and then we'll bring it to Ellis. This isn't about going over anyone's head. This is following the proper chain of command for safety violations. Deshaun looked relieved. I just didn't want to be that guy who gets someone fired. You're not trying to get him fired. You're trying to prevent an injury. There's a difference. We met with Ellis, reviewed the documentation, called the kid in for a formal safety review, explained that these violations were serious and next one would result in termination. The kid got defensive. Other people do stuff like that all the time. Not at this facility, Ella said firmly. And if you see other people violating safety protocols, you report it. That's part of your job responsibility. This is bullshit. You're singling me out. We're addressing documented violations that could result in serious injury or death. This isn't personal. This is about keeping everyone safe, including you. The kid quit the next day, posted on social media about how the job was toxic and management was on a power trip. A few people who knew my history asked if I was okay with how it went down. Yeah, I said. We followed procedure. We documented everything. We gave him a chance to correct the behavior. He chose to quit. That's on him. No sleepless nights. No crisis of conscience. Just a safety issue addressed through proper channels with clear documentation. That's the difference between then and now. I learned the hard way that doing the right thing isn't enough if you do it the wrong way. That safety and inclusion aren't opposing forces. They're both part of creating functional workplaces. That your intentions don't matter if your impact causes harm. Expensive lessons. But I actually learned them. So when people ask me about what happened at my old job, I don't give them the villain version or the victim version. I give them the complicated version. I tried to address legitimate safety concerns in a way that failed to account for proper accommodation protocols and my own biases against a disabled coworker. The company failed to establish clear guidelines that would have prevented the conflict. The disabled coworker pushed against unclear boundaries in ways that created actual safety risks. Everyone made mistakes. Everyone got hurt. Nobody was entirely right. Nobody was entirely wrong. And then I took what I learned and built something better. That's the story. No clean villain, no perfect hero. Just humans being imperfect in a system that was set up to fail all of us. Marcus will ask more questions as he gets older. About fairness, about doing the right thing, about complicated situations where every choice has consequences. I'll tell him what I learned. That doing right requires both good intentions and good systems. That you have to check your own biases constantly. That impact matters more than intentions. That sometimes the best you can do is learn from your mistakes and try not to repeat them. And I'll tell him about Greg, about Aisha, about Janet and Patricia and Dennis and everyone else who played a role in teaching me one of the hardest lessons of my life. Not because I want him to judge them or judge me, but because I want him to understand that people are complicated, that situations are messy, that growth comes from acknowledging when you're wrong, even when you were also partly right. The warehouse I work at now is successful partly because we've built strong systems around both safety and accommodation. We're not perfect. We still have incidents, we still have conflicts, but we handle them better. We document clearly. We communicate directly. We assume good faith while also protecting everyone involved. And when I train new managers, I always tell them about the importance of checking their assumptions, about treating all employees as capable while also respecting their specific needs, about building systems that protect everyone instead of relying on individual judgment. I don't tell them it's because I destroyed my own career by doing it wrong. That's my story to carry. But the lessons are universal. And maybe that's the point of expensive educations. You pay the price so others can learn for free. Deshaun stopped by my office yesterday. That kid who quit, he just got fired from his new job for safety violations. Fell off a forklift because he wasn't wearing his harness. He okay? Broken wrist. Could have been worse. Yeah. You think we should have pushed harder to keep him? I thought about it. No. We gave him clear expectations and an opportunity to correct his behavior. He chose not to. We can't force people to take safety seriously. What if he'd gotten hurt here? Then it would have been on us for not following through on the consequences. That's why documentation and consistent enforcement matter. Deshaun nodded. Makes sense. Still feels bad, though. Yeah, it does. But feeling bad about enforcing safety standards is better than feeling bad about someone getting hurt because you didn't. He left, and I sat with that thought for a while. 3 years ago, I would have said that exact same thing to justify my approach with Greg. The difference now is I understand that enforcing safety standards and providing proper accommodation aren't mutually exclusive. You can do both. You have to do both. And you have to do them through established systems, not personal judgment calls. That's what Greg was trying to tell me with his folder full of documentation. That I was making personal judgment calls about his capabilities instead of following objective procedures. He was right about that, even if he was also wrong about taking unnecessary risks. Both things true at the same time. Life's messy like that. I'm okay with messy now. Took me long enough to get here, but I'm okay with it. This morning, Marcus asked me if I liked my job. Yeah, buddy, I do. Why? Because I get to help people, and I get to make sure everyone stays safe while they're working. That's good, he said. already distracted by his toy trucks. Simple answer for a complicated truth. But maybe that's okay too. Maybe the complicated part is mine to carry, and the simple part is what I pass forward. That's progress. Expensive, hard-won progress. I'll take it. The thing nobody tells you about workplace disasters is how long they echo. How a single bad day can ripple through years of your life in ways you don't expect. 6 months after I started at the medical supply warehouse, I was sorting through some old emails and found the thread with my initial incident report about Greg, the one I'd submitted to HR that started the whole cascade. Reading it back, I could see exactly where I went wrong. The language was accusatory, not objective. Greg refuses to follow safety protocols. Instead of, I observed Greg operating equipment without certification on these specific dates. Greg is a danger to himself and others. Instead of, these incidents created potential safety hazards that need to be addressed. I'd written it angry, frustrated, convinced I was right. And I was right about some things. But being right while communicating poorly is just another kind of wrong. I showed the email to Ellis. This is what I sent my last HR department. Tell me what I should have done differently. He read it carefully. This reads like you're trying to get someone fired, not solve a problem. Where's the part where you talked to the employee directly? Where's the part where you involved your supervisor in finding solutions? I did talk to him multiple times, but you didn't document those conversations. You didn't follow up in writing. You didn't give him a chance to respond formally before escalating. I was focused on preventing injuries. I get that, but from HR's perspective, this looks like a personal vendetta against a disabled employee. You gave them no choice but to protect themselves legally, which meant protecting him and cutting you loose. Yeah, I figured that out eventually. Ellis handed back my phone. You know what you do now if you see similar issues here? Document every conversation. Involve you immediately. Focus on specific observable behaviors rather than character judgments. Provide the employee with clear expectations and opportunities to correct the behavior before escalating. And I check my own biases first. Ask myself if I'd be reacting the same way to a non-disabled employee doing the same things. There you go. That's the education you paid for. I deleted that old email thread. No point keeping it. But I created a new document, a template for future safety concerns, objective language, clear documentation procedures, built-in checks against bias. Shared it with Ellis, and he loved it. We incorporated it into company policy. Now every manager at our facility uses it when addressing safety issues with any employee. Greg's ghost, in a way, helping to build better systems. Vanessa noticed me acting weird after that conversation with Ellis. You okay? You've been quiet all day. Just thinking about my old job. The whole Greg situation. Still eating at you? Sometimes. Found an old email I sent. Realized how badly I handled things. She wheeled over to my desk. Can I ask you something? Sure. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, what would you do differently? I thought about it. I'd talk to Greg directly first. Ask him what he needed. Ask him why he was pushing boundaries. I'd involve Janet earlier and push for her to establish clear role expectations in writing. I'd document everything objectively from day one instead of letting frustration build. Would Aisha still have gotten hurt? Maybe, I don't know. But at least I wouldn't have gotten forced out over how I handled it. And Greg? Greg might have felt less like he had to prove himself. Or maybe he still would have pushed too hard. People are complicated. Vanessa nodded. I've been that person. The disabled employee trying to prove I'm as capable as everyone else. You know what made me stop? What? Working somewhere that actually believed it already. Where I didn't have to constantly justify my existence. Where accommodations were built into the infrastructure instead of feeling like special favors. That's what we're trying to build here. I know. And it works. That's why when Deshaun asked me if you were cool to work for, I told him you were one of the best managers I've ever had. You said that? Yeah, because you actually give a shit about doing it right. Not just covering your ass legally, but genuinely trying to create a fair workplace. That meant more than she probably realized. The anniversary of my forced resignation came and went. 3 years since that meeting with Patricia and Dennis. 3 years since I'd signed away my career at that warehouse. I didn't mark the day or anything, but I noticed it. Thought about where I'd been 3 years ago versus where I was now. Then, unemployed, terrified, humiliated, convinced my career was over. Now, assistant operations manager, stable income, respected by my team, building systems that actually worked. Progress measured not in vindication but in growth. Claudia asked me once if I'd forgiven Greg. I don't think it's about forgiveness, I said. He didn't do anything to me personally. We were both in a bad situation and both made it worse in our own ways. Do you think he forgave you? Don't know? Don't really need to know. We're both past it. Are you, though? Past it? I thought about it honestly. Most days, yeah. Some days it still stings, but it doesn't control me anymore. She seemed satisfied with that answer. Marcus had his 3rd birthday party at a local indoor playground. Invited his daycare friends, bunch of tiny humans running around screaming. One of the kids had Down syndrome, and his mom was hovering constantly. "I'm sorry," she said when her son bumped into Marcus. "He doesn't always watch where he's going. No worries. Neither does mine." She relaxed slightly. A lot of parents get weird about it, like they're worried he'll hurt their kids or something. I watched the 2 boys playing together, Marcus showing the other kid how to climb the foam blocks. "Kids are just kids," I said. "They figure stuff out." I wish more people thought like that. Later, driving home with Marcus passed out in his car seat, I thought about that mom, about the defensive posture she'd automatically adopted, about how exhausting it must be to constantly anticipate discrimination. That's what Greg had lived with, what I'd contributed to without even realizing it, not intentionally, not maliciously. But impact isn't about intent. I told Claudia about it that night. "You're different than you were 3 years ago," she said. "How so?" "You actually think about this stuff now. Before, you would have just seen a safety issue. Now you see people. I saw people before. You saw potential liabilities. Now you see people who have specific needs within a larger system." Maybe she was right. The medical supply warehouse landed a major contract with a hospital network around month 18. Meant expanding our operations, hiring another 20 people, adding a 2nd shift. I was put in charge of the hiring and training, used everything I'd learned, created comprehensive job descriptions that clearly outlined physical requirements and available accommodations, developed an interview process that assessed actual capabilities rather than assumptions, built a training program that gave everyone clear expectations from day 1. We hired a diverse team, 2 people with mobility disabilities, 1 with hearing loss, 3 with chronic health conditions that required schedule flexibility, and a dozen others with various needs and capabilities. The first month was rough. Systems that looked good on paper had gaps in practice. We adjusted constantly, fixed problems as they emerged. But we didn't have any major incidents. No one got hurt. No one felt excluded or set up to fail. Corporate sent observers to see what we were doing right. Asked me to present at a national management conference about inclusive hiring practices in warehouse environments. Standing on that stage, talking to hundreds of managers about systems and documentation and checking your biases, I kept thinking about Greg, about how he'd helped create all of this without meaning to. Expensive education, indeed. During the Q&A, someone asked, "What do you do when an employee's disability genuinely prevents them from performing essential job functions, even with accommodation?" You document the specific functions they can't perform, work with medical professionals to verify the limitations, and then either modify the role if possible or help them transition to a different position that better fits their capabilities. What you don't do is make that determination yourself based on what you think they can or can't handle. But what if they refuse to acknowledge their limitations and keep pushing into dangerous situations? I thought about how to answer that. Then you document the specific unsafe behaviors, provide clear written expectations, and enforce consequences consistently regardless of disability status. Safety standards apply to everyone equally. The accommodation is in how someone performs the work, not in exempting them from safety requirements. The questioner nodded. So it's not about lowering standards. Never about lowering standards. It's about providing different paths to meet the same standards. After the conference, 3 companies reached out wanting to hire me as a consultant. The money was tempting, but I liked where I was. Liked the team I'd built. Liked coming to work and knowing I was doing something that mattered. Ellis told me I was crazy for turning down the consulting offers. "You could make double your salary," he said, "and lose what I built here. Not worth it. Most people would take the money." "I'm not most people. I learned that the hard way," he laughed. "Fair enough." Year 4 at the medical supply warehouse brought new challenges. One of our warehouse associates, a guy named Raphael who'd been with us since the expansion, developed a chronic pain condition, started missing work. When he was there, his performance dropped. The old me would have documented it as a performance issue and moved toward termination. The new me called him into my office for a conversation. "Talk to me about what's going on," I said. "You've been solid for 2 years. Something changed." Raphael was hesitant at first. Then it all came out. Chronic back pain from an old injury that had gotten worse, doctor visits, medications that made him foggy, physical therapy that helped, but was expensive and time-consuming. "I can't afford to lose this job," he said, "but I'm struggling to keep up. Have you talked to HR about medical accommodation? I don't want to be a problem." There it was. That fear of being seen as a liability. You're not a problem. You're an employee with a medical condition that needs accommodation. That's literally what our policies are designed for. We worked with HR to set up a formal accommodation, modified his duties to reduce heavy lifting, adjusted his schedule to allow for physical therapy appointments, provided an ergonomic workstation for tasks that required standing. It took 3 months to find the right balance. But Raphael's performance came back. He's still with us now, one of our most reliable workers. He stopped by my office about 6 months after we'd implemented his accommodations. "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "At my last job, when I started having pain issues, my manager basically pushed me out. Made it clear I wasn't welcome if I couldn't do the full job. I was terrified that would happen here too, but it didn't. Because you actually listened. Because this place has systems that work. Because you treated me like a person instead of a problem to solve. That's what we're supposed to do." A lot of places don't, though. I've told like 10 people about working here. Half of them have applied. That's how you build a good workplace. One conversation, one accommodation, one employee at a time. Word got around in the local disability community that our warehouse was a good place to work. We started getting applications from people who'd been shut out of other jobs. People with conditions that required flexibility or specific accommodations. We couldn't hire everyone, but we hired the ones we could accommodate. And we were honest with the ones we couldn't about why their needs exceeded our current capabilities. Transparent communication, clear systems, consistent enforcement. It wasn't perfect. We still had conflicts, still had performance issues, still had people who didn't work out, but we handled it better, with documentation, with fairness, with respect for everyone involved. Deshaun asked me once why I cared so much about getting this stuff right. "Because I got it spectacularly wrong once," I said. "And I refused to make the same mistakes twice." "What happened?" I gave him the summary. The parts I was allowed to share, given the NDA. The parts I'd processed enough to talk about without getting defensive. He listened without interrupting. "Damn," he said when I finished. "That's rough." "Yeah, but I learned from it. And now I'm using what I learned to build something better." "Does it still bother you? That you lost your career over it?" "Sometimes. But I didn't lose my career. I lost one job, built a better career afterward. Took a while to see it that way, but that's the reality." "You ever talk to that Greg guy again?" "Not since that one LinkedIn exchange. Don't really need to." We said what needed to be said. "Think he knows you're doing all this stuff now? The training, the consulting, the whole inclusive workplace thing? Probably not. And that's okay. I'm not doing it to prove anything to him. I'm doing it because it's the right way to run a workplace." Deshaun nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you learned that lesson. Because if you hadn't, I probably wouldn't have gotten hired here." "Why do you say that?" "Because when I came in for my interview with crutches, you didn't flinch. You just asked me about the job requirements and whether I could meet them with or without accommodation. First interview where I felt like my disability was just a factor to consider, not the only thing that mattered. That's how it should be." "Should be, yeah. Usually isn't, though." Marcus started pre-K. Every morning drop-off, I'd see other parents hustling their kids into the building. Everyone stressed and rushed. One morning, I noticed a dad with a prosthetic leg helping his daughter out of the car. Another parent made a comment. "Must be hard managing with that." The dad smiled tightly. "I manage fine." I caught his eye and nodded. He nodded back. Small moment of recognition between people who understood what it meant to be underestimated. Later that week, same dad, his name was Keith, approached me at pickup. "You work at that medical supply warehouse, right? Saw your company shirt." "Yeah. You looking for work?" "Maybe. I've been out of the workforce for a few years. Medical retirement from my last job after I lost my leg. But I'm cleared to work now and going stir-crazy at home." "What's your background?" "Military logistics, inventory management. Similar stuff to what I'd guess you do." I got his contact information, called him the next day for an informal conversation about what we did and what accommodations we could provide. He came in for an interview the following week. Ellis and I talked through his experience, his capabilities, his specific needs. "I'm not looking for special treatment," Keith said. "I just need people to focus on what I can do instead of what I can't." "That's exactly our philosophy here," Ellis said. "We hired him for our inventory management team. He's been phenomenal. Organized, detail-oriented, brings a level of discipline from his military background that's elevated the whole department. These are the wins that matter, not vindication or revenge or proving I was right about Greg 3 years ago. Just building workplaces where people can succeed regardless of their physical circumstances.